For as many times as I've asked this question, that's the most interesting and nuanced and unique answer I've ever received. That's really cool, Jason. Welcome back to Cannabis Matters. I'm Eric Rosen, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jason Nelson from BeLeaf today. Jason, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Appreciate it.
Jason, you've had quite the journey in cannabis, and I know you've been an executive at Cresco. You're currently the CEO at BeLeaf. So all very remarkable kind of accomplishments in their own right. I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of what drew you to cannabis amongst all other options in the world.
I think for all of us, the longer you're in the industry, the more it's been a lot of bridges crossed, so to speak. So, no, hey, growing up as a tier kid, I basically made it to college in my undergrad without trying cannabis. You know, I certainly had high school students that I was familiar with that had tried it. But, you know, for my relationship to it, I started working my freshman year in a kitchen at a microbrewery. And truthfully, in most kitchens, you can certainly stumble onto cannabis and at times other illicit drugs as well. And so in my first general relationship of it, that exposure to it was to say, hey, you know, what the messages I've been told as a kid on behalf of the DARE program don't seem to align with cannabis specifically. You know, you could easily see instances of cannabis use that seem to be less detrimental than certainly alcohol use, let alone some of the other harder stuff. So was provoked to try it, and then I did. I initially realized its value is, for me personally, as a lifestyle use component, relaxing at the end of the day.
Tell us about BeLeaf. Curious to hear a little bit about your charge, the mission of the company, where things have been, where they're at, and most importantly, where you're taking them.
Well, so BeLeaf actually was born back in 2016. So back in 2016, CBD hemp program was launched here in Missouri. BeLeaf holds one of those licenses, and that was, you know, along the time that everybody had high hopes and prospects for hemp CBD, and then generally that crash afterwards that continues to struggle with certainly, foreign imports competing for CBD hemp products, both in source material and likewise finished goods. And so I think really trying to hoe their road in that particular iteration was difficult. It also, and most notably, gave them an early indication that, hey, if we can get a medical cannabis program here in Missouri via ballot initiative, call it 2018, 2019, that BeLeaf was well positioned to apply for those licenses. And so they did. They applied for retail, wholesale production, as well as ultimately transportation. And, perhaps being a participant in that initial CBD hemp program, gave them a favorable look at their applications. And so we were awarded as a vertically integrated single state operator. So I've got 5 retail under my Suede brand. I have 3 production licenses, which produces my Sense and my Kuko brands and my Amend medical focus brands. Then we were, about the time that I joined the company a year ago, were awarded a transportation license as well.
BeLeaf is lucky to have you at the helm specifically for a number of reasons. One of which I imagine is your exposure to the California market and also Cresco. So you've had 2 tours of duty before arriving in Missouri as it's coming online as from a legalization perspective. So from your vantage point, how's the state coming along with respect to legalization and growth?
Yeah, I'd say it is. It's an interesting case study in each one of these markets. And you're right. So we had Midwest programs for Illinois, for example, that were able to go adult use starting in 2020. But, in each one of these iterations, there's slight differentiation. And what we found in Missouri, I believe that this is the closest market we've ever seen pivot from a relatively well and even considerably possibly overproduced medical market where you have over 60 plus producers, 30 edibles brands, for example, 200 plus retail licenses that were operating prior to the adult use pivot. And so, that's unique.
The state has done a good job from a rollout perspective at the macro level, being in relationship to the consumer and having everything right size. So I think we can all agree on that. And BeLeaf has done an equally good job from a rollout standpoint. And the most poignant question I can think of is really about people. And how you've thought about, how the organization has thought about building the dream teams of today and tomorrow and ensuring that your talent strategy matches your growth strategy amidst all of the change with adult use rolling out. So love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's one of the things my fortunate experience has been able to leverage cultural competency when it comes to not only maintaining a cannabis business relationship with its employees, but then scaling that, right? So there's 2 different components there, right? If you're doing what you're doing well, how do you take that relationship and go through a 3 to 4x, a 4 to 5x, 5 to 10x increase in a corporate business relationship. And so, having cut my teeth at a spot like Cresco Labs, it certainly helped you with what to do, more notably, unfortunately, with what not to do and how to manage your staff. Retention is key, right? The key thing about retention is that, every cannabis firm has a set of very dedicated individuals who are committed to its success. And in any of those populations of individuals, you have their strengths and their weaknesses, right? You have things that they're good at and things that they probably need some support on to improve on. Having a roadmap associated with how to manage those, one, build on strengths, right? That's first and foremost, leverage what people are good at. Most notably, knowing what I need to instruct my staff, both at the executive level, below the mid-level, is what mistakes not to make. How do you approach doing what you're doing currently and not make the mistakes that really do hamper just responsible growth. And then two, as you're taking that and scaling it up, you're right, there's a whole other set of criteria and or mistakes to not make, so to speak, that it's just been a fortunate relationship for me to have built, learned from, and then now to your point, have married with BeLeaf at the time that they needed it.
So on the topic of talent, every cannabis company is always challenged with this decision around how much legacy talent do we keep in-house versus how much external talent do we adopt and proactively seek out for the sake of right-sizing where we're at as a company to the needs of what it's going to take to bring that company at this moment in time to maximum levels of success. So how do you and the team think about the balancing act? I like to call it the balance barometer between the legacy talent, being able to speak to the market, the plan, and connect with your target market, and also have the folks in place that'll be able to scale the business on the supply chain front, on the economic front with finance, on the accounting front. How are you thinking about that as the org is growing and evolving?
Yeah, it's a $1 million question, I know, for a lot of firms. And I think, gee, let's kind of break it into two parts. First and foremost, talent retention and or experiential retention still maintains as a premium in cannabis, i.e., certainly your larger operators who unfortunately have gone through massive layoffs, they're running a very substantial liability of making similar mistakes that were made by the previous leadership and or employees that are no longer with that company, right? So you really do have to approach your existing assets and resources with that liability being a big part of their retention value, right? That you want to spend the energy in explaining where we currently are, where we need to take this. And then to your point, if you're empowering those individuals to welcome these new leadership teams across any of those business units that you mentioned, that's the first part of the equation. And then the more notably or important part of that equation is for any new executive, mid-level manager, or even entry-level employee at BeLeaf, you really are positioning them. It's like, listen, you have your existing skill sets, whether you come from cannabis or you don't. We're going to ask you to come in. If you're in a leadership position, you really need to split your energy half and half as a leader and a learner. So you're going to be taking the knowledge and the value from these legacy employees who you want to continue to empower, at the same time of bringing in those abilities to scale an operation, for example, or increase product throughput. Those key things that really is required to be able to bring. If you have a successful model for X amount of consumers, now you have 3 to 4 times that amount of consumers. So it's a successful marriage. A lot of times you'll have a discipline that you're coming from. You know what you know your existing business models. You can come in and make some really rapid assessments and ultimately changes to the operation that might seem intuitive from the discipline that they come from, but without the relationship of a strong foundation with your legacy employees to say, no, compliance doesn't let you do that, or no, you can't do that because of this particular reason. You see this unfortunate cycle, and truthfully what that means for a lot of new either mid-level leaders or executives that they wash their hands of it and say this doesn't seem like it's for me.
It's really interesting. I like the way you phrase it in terms of it's like the last mile of the supply chain, like having one side of the talent pool help out the other with respect to just being able to get to the finish line. And I would imagine vice versa in scenarios too. But you've got to have trust. You've got to trust. You've got to have rapport. And that doesn't happen on its own in a vacuum. That's got to be something that's built by design, I imagine.
Yeah, and it is a big part of that legacy contributor conversation is here's the upward mobility path, despite the fact of bringing in this new leadership. You really have to have that conversation very directly with them because they've been investing with you this entire time. Anybody who works in the cannabis industry will tell you that there's a disproportionate relationship to the commitment required to have success in this space compared to, I would say, most any other industry. You certainly have industries that go through kind of these consequential changes and or innovations that do really require a general extra degree of commitment and dealing with not only the federal illegality component of it, the nascency from a state regulatory perspective. That's going to introduce stress, more so than most people are prepared to deal with. So when you have this group of folks who've been paying that dude for you, you need to say, listen, here's your path with BeLeaf, here's your path with Sense or Suede, and then capitulate to it. Listen, at some point, if I'm able to grow you within this company, I have to understand that your value to someone who is not as sophisticated as we are might be 20% more than the value is to me from a compensation package perspective, leadership title, all the things that a legacy group certainly is vying for. And so it's if you can manage those conversations and really still provide paths for upward mobility within the company to your existing employees through the conduit of these new employees who are really going to bring in these models that allow us to scale that, not only say within Missouri. Then you start to have the conversations like building a multi-state platform, which I've obviously been through before. So you're right. If you don't have those conversations, what I can tell you is that, yeah, your legacy folks become disenfranchised to feel that they've been upended and circumvented by a new leadership team or structure. And then they don't empower the new leadership team and structure to have success. So you just end up in this rotunda of not only losing your legacy employees who helped you build what it is, but then just frustrating the new leadership component to ultimately underperform.
That's wicked smart. Career pathing as the solution for the balance barometer is always going to be a winning scenario. That's, for as many times as I've asked this question, that's the most interesting and nuanced and unique answer I've ever received. That's really cool, Jason. So let's talk data. On the data front, how are you leveraging data to really stay in front of and apprised of and ahead of consumer preferences and buying behaviors?
Cannabis at a state-by-state level, even in a market-by-market level, has been very divorced from any type of unified data tracking platform. Of those who know, an ERP system typically manages a lot of those data elements. That hasn't existed in cannabis. And in fact, you've had some very large ERP platforms that are well-funded, millions of dollars committed by MSOs to try to figure this out, ultimately to have that ERP system say, the cannabis production in and of itself is so complicated that I can take this one plant and turn it into this, depends on the potency or the yield, like all the things that go back and forth. So we're still, and I am the most optimistic I've ever been about taking what you consider now siloed pieces of data platforms and managing those into what functionally is an ERP system. And starting, typically I tend to think about things as you're starting with the plant itself, right? So as a wholesale producer, I'm going to produce 1 milligram of THC in a plant form. There's now a software package that I think is in the best position we've ever seen, call it third or fourth generation, to actually take that particular relationship to your production outcomes, then ultimately of that raw biomass, what it's going to turn into, some costs associated with it, so your COGS tracking, those types of things, then backing into reorder triggers for pouches, for packaging, or for nutrients, or any of the things that particular wing and arm of what we do is managing. And we're excited about that.
We were chatting recently, and you mentioned an interesting challenge that you're solving for, which I can't imagine you are the only ones that are seeking to solve this problem. And that's, how do we attract boomers? How do we get in front of baby boomers? And what's the best purchase path for them that might differ from the average consumer? So including but not limited to data, I'm curious how you're tackling sort of this issue with this particular demographic group.
For a baby boomer to offer feedback on their experience in a dispensary, one, the grad student had to take them by the hand and go through the dispensary. They admitted right away, like, I would have never went through a dispensary. It's just too intimidating. And then as that grad student was taking them through each one of the components of, look at all the menu variety, look at all the pricing and all the potencies and all these things. And even if you're having someone a really customer forward experience in a dispensary, it's just a tough prospect for them, right? It's just not something that I'm really content. Like, listen, all I have to do is put a billboard in a retirement community, cannabis here. They're not going to show up. So then the next question is, how do you get them engaged to, one, understand the value of cannabis for either their lifestyle or their medical ailment? We have made some good progress in the last 2 years. And what I'll say, most anybody and everybody knows somebody who has been a medical cannabis patient who has taken benefit from medical cannabis, right? Or a next extension of it in an adult use market. Most people understand that, listen, get some extra tax revenue. People report that it's a comfortable lifestyle product, so the sky doesn't fall. So even in that premise in their head that they're really starting to navigate, how can I approach cannabis as a baby boomer, as someone who was, force-fed literally stigma for the majority of their adult lives? How do you circumvent that? And so, key components. One, for adult use, I think you can. I think you can approach an adult use lifestyle style consumer with a low dose product, something consistent. They're obviously not going to be open to a vaporizer pen, likely. They're not going to roll up a pre-roll, for example. But if you do have access to, say, a gel cap or a capsule type product, which we do here in Missouri, I believe at a low dose, microdose, that particular conversation is relatively easy to have. You have to get in front of them and have that, right? So if it's an information seminar based off of a community building, or if it's something that is an extra layer of saying, listen, I can't make a medical claim associated with this, but from a lifestyle relationship, what I can say is that this has been anecdotally shown to help with sleep, for example, at the end of the day with the right cannabinoids. Or if you want a daytime use product that maybe just helps your well-being, here's the product for you. And then conversely, on the medical side, where you do have someone who's maybe going through chemotherapy to treat cancer, there's over time, there's more research, certainly coming out of Israel, I believe some coming out of Canada, that does set the stage to have the conversation like, listen, again, I can't make a medical claim, but what I can reference is this clinical research that may offer some promise for you if you're willing to adopt cannabis as part of your treatment. Granted, speak to your doctor, go through all the checks and balances that you need to. There's no way I can design a dispensary that attracts that particular demographic. And you credit it too of just what they've experienced in their lifetimes, right? It was just fully weaponized, fully criminalized, fully stigmatized, to the point where even if it is the most conducive relationship, they don't really feel good about it, right? They don't. It's just not something. And there's definitely outliers. There are people in that generation who are more than comfortable to come see us. But by the dollars percentage, you're right. It is. It's Gen Z through Gen X, basically, and millennials are the ones who are coming to see us right now. And to that end, we want to be able to welcome those customers with both products and access that speaks to them specifically.
It's a very interesting point about really undoing generational trauma with respect to boomers. That's a conversation for another day, but it's a very, very interesting point that we should double click on at some point. Jason, you're a great friend. You're a commensurate professional, best in class, bar none. And I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today and sharing some of your insights and perspectives.
Now, between friends, I'll just have you buy the next cocktail we share, right?
Hey, on me. Bottomless drinks, whatever you want.
There you go. Now, my pleasure, Eric. Thank you.
All right. Talk soon, Jason.